what you just heard is influenced pretty heavily by Stevie Ray Vaughan's playing. That also means that, you know, I'll be tuned down half a step on all my strings in the key to what they call E-flat tuning. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do is just go through all my open strings. That way you can make sure that your guitar is in tune with mine before we start breaking this solo down into parts. So I'm going to start on the low E string, and like I said before, I'm tuned down to E-flat tuning, so this is going to be a half step down on every string. So if you need to, you can rewind the video and make sure that you're in tune with me before we start. I'm going to show you what notes to play. Just to give you a little point of reference, I'm going to be starting in what I call box 1. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, you might want to go back and review the lessons that I taught on the 5 blues boxes before you get into this one. Because I'm going to be talking about box 1 and box 2, which are the 2 blues boxes that I teach that this solo comes from. But anyway, let's get into the individual parts of this solo. Part 1, when played at full speed, sounds like this. Actually, it starts right here. And what we're doing for that part is we're going to start here. We're going to go to a bend here. Then up to these 2 notes. And we're going to slide up into box 2 here. Now we wait a little bit, and then we come in with part 2, which sounds like this. Alright, so let's go through that one note at a time. You're going to start in with a full step bend here, a whole step bend. Going to drop down on that same fret, and then real quick, and after you do 2 hits on the root note here, you're going to pause and then top off part 2 like this. Now all you're going to do for that is to do the same bend that you started with, but just do it 2 times real quick. Alright, so let's review parts 1 and part 2. Part 2. Alright, now part 3 is kind of like a call and response with part 2. Because part 3 goes... Pretty simple. You guess basically all those notes were used in part 2. It's like the beginning of part 2. And then that takes us right into part 4, which helps us connect box 2 to box 1, and it sounds like this. And what we're doing there is we're dropping to this note at the bottom end of box 2. Then we're going to drop here. Now we're going to slide to this note and bend it up at the same time. And then drop here. So parts 1 through 4 together sound like... Whoop, I'm sorry, threw an extra note in there. Alright, now we're getting it into part 5 here. And part 5 just simply goes... And that's a whole bunch of little licks all strung together there, but let's go through it one note at a time here. We're going to start here just like we did on part 1. Then this little hammer-on riff here. I'm going to pick that note. Then we're going to play this. So when played at full speed, part 5 sounds like this. And part 6 is kind of a response to that on the bottom notes. So what we're going to do for this one is we're just going to walk down. And a little hammer on here. Fret that with your thumb. And then back up to the root note for 2 hits. Alright, so parts 1 through, I believe that was 6, sound like this. And that takes us right into part 7 here, which goes. And to do that, we're going to lead into part 7. It's kind of the same way we did parts 1 and part 5. But instead of going, we're going to go. Slowly bend that note up, and then after a while we're going to go. So again, part 7 goes. And that takes us right into part 8, which goes. And the last part is part 9, which goes. So let's look at the notes of part 9 here. I'm going to do a full bend here again. Come back down. Drop to the root note here. And then all you have is a little bounce back and forth between these two notes. And then you're done. So you see, you take a solo like that and you break it into little bite-sized chunks, and then you can keep track of it in your mind. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to review all the separate parts. I'm going to call them out, but I'm going to play them at full speed. Alright, let's start with part 1 here. And then part 2. Part 3. Part 4. Part 5. Part 6. Part 7. Part 8. Part 9. So when you put it all together in a solo, it can sound kind of complicated, but you see, when you break it into little parts, you can focus on learning just that part, and then you can put them all together to form the solo. And I'm going to give you some real valuable kind of pointers here for how to play this fluidly that I didn't give in the free version. And the first thing I want to talk about is what I'm calling part 1 of this solo, which just goes. Now there's a couple little things that go on during this part that I think will make a big difference in your playing if you realize what's going on here. The first is this innocent looking bend that goes like this. This bend right here is one of the fundamental things about blues playing in general, but also Stevie Ray Vaughan's style. Now what's so tricky about this bend is that if you're not careful, you're bending it up, but then you let it come back down like this. But proper use of this bend is to kind of catch it at its peak and then move up to this note. So how do you do that? Well, there's two things that you do to stop that from coming back down. The first is when you bend up, what you're going to be doing is pushing your fingers past the point where the string will stick, and it's going to pop under like that. When that happens, you need to have your palm kind of muting as you pick, so that when it pops off, that your palm kind of catches the initial ring. But then also these fingers have to be barring the top two strings. You start with bending all three strings, but then as soon as you reach the peak, you're dropping this finger back down to bar these notes. And when the string pops under your fingertip, it hits the fingertip of your index finger here, and that keeps it from ringing out. And by the time it hits your fingertip, you're already following through to pick this note. So it's one downward picking motion to pick all three of those notes there. Now when you slide into the root note in box 2 here, and that's the other thing about what's happening in part 1 here, you're transitioning from box 1. Box 1 is right here. So you're transitioning from box 1 right up into box 2. And when you hit this, you're going to be doing some vibrato. And this is a vibrato technique that might seem a little strange because most vibrato you see looks like this. But this one you're going to be doing with your ring finger. And you actually get all three fingers on this string here. And you're going to just... There's no shortcut to this. You're just making your hand go back and forth like this. And I think you hit it twice. And you can kind of trail off like that. And then when the timing gets right, you come in with part 2. Now the bend here is pretty critical because you got to get it all the way up to match this note right here. So you're just bending it all the way up and right back down. Now you can see I'm using all three fingers to bend here. Even so, you can see by the whites of my fingernails there that it's putting a lot of pressure on my fingertips. Another thing that you can do is to pick with the flesh of your middle finger from under the string. And what you do to do that is you just reach down and you pluck like that when you go up for the bend. So if you time it just right, you can pluck for this note when it comes back down, and for this one, and then have your pick right here, so it's like, and then you can just throw your pick in there right away to pick that last note. And then you're gonna hit that again with some vibrato, and then mute it real quick, and when the beat is just right, then you finish it with. And that's a little Albert King type thing. You're going to bend all the way, come back a little bit, and then push it the rest of the way. And then part 3 is just an echo of part 2. So there's really not much new with that. Part 4 comes straight from a lesson that I taught called Connecting the Boxes a while back. It's called, I think it was lesson 3. And all you're doing is transitioning from box 2 back to box 1. Now this transitioning between these boxes is one of the keys to kind of playing fluidly through all of them. And this riff right here is a great way to get from up here. Takes you right into box 1 where you can launch into, which is what we're going to be doing next. But anyway, all you're doing for this one is dropping with your index finger here, then your middle finger down to the bottom note of box 2. You're going to slide to one of these notes in box 1 and bend up at the same time. And then down to this note. The key is not to let up pressure on this G string as you slide and bend. Alright, now let's get into part 5 here. Part 5 is kind of a combination lick. It starts just like part 1 did, except you're going to kind of complete a little circle here. So I think of these as a circle. So you're going to do a... And what's tricky about this is you can hammer onto this note if you want to, but at the speed that we're playing it at, it really kind of pays to hammer on this to actually pick this note, so that you end up with a sharper sound there. So I'm actually picking all those notes there. And then we're going to follow up with a little hammer-on riff here. And again, after this riff, you could hammer on that note. But at the speed that we're playing it at, you have a better sound if you will pick it. So we got... and then we're going to throw in a... So the first part is the same. We just cap it off with that little bend right there. And so this right here is the same as in the Albert King box. Alright, let's move on to part 6 here. And part 6, like I said, is just a... Now this kind of lick was used a lot by Stevie, and you'll hear Kenny Wayne Shepherd use this a lot in his music, or at least in some of his earlier stuff. And all you're doing, the key here is you want to start with a nice thick rake to get that nice fat sound. And when you're raking all the strings without letting any of them ring out. And at the same time, you're pressing down on this note and hammering onto this note. So you're hitting all the strings, but only letting that one ring out. And that's kind of tricky doing, though. That's a good exercise to do just to get into the habit of throwing that hammer on there. Because you could just go, but this just makes it a little bit more interesting. And you can see I hit this bass note with my thumb. And one thing that Stevie did a lot that was cool was kind of bouncing back between the low root note and kind of the mid root note here. And then you can throw some vibrato on there that's very similar to the vibrato you do up here. Alright, now, that is going to take us into part 7 here. The only thing that's tricky here, because we've done all this before, when we get to this bend here, because of how long we're on this bend, you want to take it real slow. And then when we go up to this note, the timing of that is kind of tricky. You're going to hammer on here, and then immediately makes it tricky is that the timing is different than the other licks that we did where we were like, we're doing. So you can kind of imagine the metronome. So this is kind of a ghost note here. It's only serving kind of like. And then the final part, part 9, is, or excuse me, part 8. It's very similar to part 1. And then ending it with part 9 here. Which we've done before too. Now the only thing that makes this different is the way we ride this root note all the way to the end, alternating with this note up here. And that's straight Albert King right there. And to really get that ringing sound, you got to be pressing really hard for this vibrato. And when you do this last little bend here, you can twist this up a little bit with your index finger. And then you're all set to go into your next solo, which could start, or something along those lines. But anyway, that gives you hopefully a lot more in-depth detail about the finer points about playing this solo. The last thing I'm going to talk about is just timing. And one of the hardest things when you're an intermediate player is that you probably have built up some speed already, but even if you don't realize it yet, your timing, if you're like most people, is probably still kind of off at this stage. And I remember when I was in college and I was getting to the point where I could play a lot of things fast, and as I got older I realized that I wasn't ending my riffs at the correct spot, I wasn't starting them at the correct spot, and I was just playing them as soon as I could get there, and I wasn't waiting for the right beat. So what's really critical about this solo is the timing between the riffs. Now I've intentionally left a lot of space between the licks here, because it's real easy to fill up a solo with a lot of fast notes, but that's not always what sounds best. So when I go into part 1 here, there's a lot of space, and then part 2 comes in. Now if you're not paying attention to timing, you might be tempted to go, but you'll find yourself way ahead of the beat. So watch the demonstration of the solo at the beginning of this video to really pick up on just how long I wait before I start some of these licks. So it's all in time with the beat there. Now part 5 is the only part that's really tricky. That's one of the most challenging things about playing that lick, is realizing that you're not going to be in time with the beat the entire way through, but you've got to end up on beat with everything. So when I'm playing it, it's kind of like, and when I hit that note right there, you got to make sure that ends on a beat. And it's a little bit hard to do tapping my foot here because I can't seem to walk and chew gum at the same time. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention, and I don't talk about that as much on the advanced version of this lesson because, you know, by the time you get to the point where you can play some of those extra fast riffs, you kind of have to have picked up on the timing. But I wanted to draw special attention to it for the intermediate lesson because it's one of the most critical things that you can learn as a player who is starting to develop some speed and you're able to hear stuff. If you don't pick up on that timing, you're going to be like a whole lot of other guitar players out there who can play a lot of really fast stuff, but it never quite matches up with the drums. It never quite matches up with everything else. And it really kind of is such a small thing that if you really pay attention and learn how to develop it, it adds a huge amount to your soloing. So that does it for this intermediate slow blues 12-bar solo lesson. I hope that you're able to understand everything, pick out all the notes, use the tablature if you couldn't pick up certain notes from the video. Be sure to use the slow motion feature of the QuickTime player if you haven't discovered that already. And hopefully this will help you kind of take your soloing to the next level. Now, once you get real comfortable with this intermediate version, I suggest picking up the advanced version as well, because I cover a couple of licks in that version that are a lot faster than what I taught in this one. And once you start getting a feel for this one, you can move up to that one, and the elements of the solo are essentially the same, but the details that I talk about are more tailored for an advanced player. So when you feel like you're ready for that, I encourage you to go pick that one up. But until then, I hope this lesson helps you out, and I'll see you next time.